I wanted to show you guys this graph. Now, this graph shows you the difference in reported AWOL cases reported to the Prosecutor General of Ukraine. The first graph on the left is between 2022 and 2024. Now, this shows 59,000 cases of AWOL. Now you move over to 2022 to 2025, and it is all the cases is 235,000. 235,000 cases of AWOL. Now, of course, that includes the previous 60,000. So you would end up being somewhere between probably roughly 170,000 AWOL cases over the last year and a half or so. Which, when you consider how many soldiers that could fill up on the front line, when you consider how many trenches could be manned there, how many people could be piloting FPV drones, how many people could be working in logistical roles, how many people could be working in anti-drone teams, working in air defense, working in armored crews and artillery and mortars, or working in the engineering corps, helping build Ukraine's defenses. Or hell, even working in Ukraine's defense industry. But of course, we're talking about AWOL cases here. That is pretty devastating. It's devastating when you read the amount of soldiers that are, the amount of men that continue to, pay off Ukrainian officials in order to learn the routes by which border guards patrol the border so they can jump the border into Poland and into other countries like Romania so they can avoid the draft and avoid the war. It's sad the amount of Ukrainians for Ukraine's war effort. It's demonstrably negative. The amount of Ukrainians that left once given the opportunity of young Ukrainians who are not yet war age that are probably going to now stay outside of the country because there was a gap where they allowed men between the ages of 18 and 22 to leave the country, and over 100,000 Ukrainian men took that opportunity. But if the war is still going on in 3 years, and they hit the age of 25 and you're a Ukrainian in Germany, a male Ukrainian, and you're called for service, are you going to come back? A lot of them won't. A lot of them won't. Does that mean that regulation should have still been in place? That's a decision for Ukrainians to make, but this all has an impact on Ukraine's ability to make the war. Now, now let me be clear. When we're looking at these numbers, I think one of the most worrying numbers is the amount of AWOL cases, because 290,000, this is old data actually, 290,000 cases for the month of October. Devastating. I mean, not for the month of October, generally for these AWOL cases, devastating for the Ukrainian armed forces. But for this month, the amount of AWOL cases, I have it written down here actually. Let me see if I can pull out the amount of AWOL cases that we have for this month. One second. I think I might actually have it as a bookmark. Let me pull it up here. This is interesting data, so I want to make sure I report it. Or at least repeat it. I'm not the person who broke the story. For this month, for the month of October, for the last month we just went off from, 21,602 cases of AWOL officially recorded by the Ukrainian Prosecutor General's office, which is the highest recorded monthly number of the entire war. What all this data clearly indicates, irrespective of the fact that a really decent percentage of this is men who would return later. That means people would go AWOL because they got in a conflict with their commander, or they're giving crazy orders, or they're tired, or they want to go visit their family and they get frustrated, and then they come back because they understand that they don't want to have that kind of legal trouble over their head for all that time, or they change mind, like I can't, if it's not me, who is it going to be? And so a lot of these cases, people come back to position, or an offer is made by prosecutors that, hey, if you come back, we will not charge you. There's been flexibility that's been introduced that people for their first AWOL case can actually just come back into the Ukrainian armed forces. I know a bunch of people who, left during training or went AWOL, that if they came back, they could actually just go straight back to the front with no legal repercussions, because you're allowed one AWOL because of how common going AWOL is. And I think this is not only due to the conditions on the front line, but also the Ukrainian mentality, where if somebody like puts their nose in your face, some government official, and says, you are going to do this way, even though obviously it's not the way to do it, XYZ, and this is silly or it seems damaging, a lot of Ukrainians throw up their hands and like walk off. And I know volunteers, people who have fundraised for drones, worked in groups that provide drones for the Ukrainian armed forces that were mobilized, and due to the nature of their mobilization and due to the nature of the command that they were going to be put under, they decided to jump the fence and get out of there. And these are strong patriots for Ukraine. But the standards across the board are not uniform in the Ukrainian armed forces. If you're in somewhere that's of a decent reputation, whether you're talking about like the 68th, you're talking about Azov, you're talking about 3rd Assault, you're talking about like 414, or somewhere like 73rd, you're talking about these units or these brigades that are known to care about their people. Lut, these are brigades that and National Guard units like Kartia that people know care about their people. These are people that look after them, that the commanders who have some experience, that they're not going to be giving you crazy orders, and they want to give you the best chance to survive because they know giving you the best chance to survive also helps give Ukraine the best chance to survive. And then there's other groups that don't have that reputation. And there are certain officers that probably should not be officers. And the Tetseka in this country, the people who engage in mobilization, are widely regarded as a group of thugs, of people who are not that intelligent on standard. And from my interactions with them, I would say they are of below average intelligence, who just know that they got to go get people. And so they're going to go scanning through everybody's documents to go get people. And in some cases, if they're not getting enough people, they're going to mobilize who they can get. If your documents in order, that should not be the case. But a lot of people have been harassed for days, even with their documents in order, even when they work in defense industries, before finally being let go. And I remember hearing a story when I was in the woods with my boys partying and we were having a good time. And he's telling me the story of like, I work in defense industry. Tetseka comes to me. And this was a funny story. This is not an example of this is an example of Tetseka going too far, but also an example of somebody winding them up. Tetseka come to me and they say, show us your documents. I show them the documents and they say, we're going to mobilize me. Now, I know that I work in defense industry, and I know I work in very important defense industry. Like, I talk to him and I'm like, oh yeah, I saw this weapon system. It's like, oh yeah, I designed that. It's like, oh fuck, very important defense industry. And he just decides, you know what? Fine, I'll get in the back of the car, and they're driving him around. They're talking to him, and they're looking at him, and he's smiling. He's got the shit-eating grin on his face, and they look back at him like, why are you smiling? Don't worry. He's like, why are you smiling? You're going to go to the front. Like, they're confused as to why he's happy. And they say, don't worry. We'll go get you McDonald's, man. We'll get you McDonald's. We'll go get you some food. Don't worry. We're mobilizing you. You didn't expect this was going to happen today, but don't worry. That filet-o-fish is going to hit, man. And so they stop over for McDonald's. He gets his McDonald's. And as he's eating his filet-o-fish, it wasn't a filet-o-fish. I'm just saying filet-o-fish because I like the filet-o-fish. My grandfather did. I did. I'm keeping up the tradition. They get a call from their officer, from their commanding officer, who had apparently gotten a call from somebody who works in the defense industry, who had informed him about his exemption. And he comes back, his face white, and he asks them, where does he want to drop them off? But these types of stories are scarily common. And so due to the nature, and not just the fact that you were mobilized, and a lot of people don't want to be mobilized, but the way in which they were mobilized and the reputation that Tetseka has driven some people to flee the country or to spend the majority of the war in their grandmother's attic or basement, just chilling on the web or whatever, because they know if they're outside, they're more likely to get spotted and get mobilized. And so due to the bad reputation of the Tetseka, due to the bad reputation of some of the Ukrainian officer corps, due to the bad reputation of command, due to the bad representation of the Ukrainian Supreme Commander, Syrskyi, there are a lot of people who say, I don't think it's worth it. I don't think it's worth it. Who maybe, even if they were mobilized and didn't like it before, they might have given it more of a shake, maybe would have found some camaraderie, maybe would have found some purpose, but now won't, because it's just not worth it. Especially when you add the fact of intermittent stop and go Western aid to the mix, and you're being told, don't worry, you will go to frontline position in Lada. You will be fine. Back of jump in the back of the pickup truck. Everything is good instead of an armored vehicle. But when you consider that just like one Russian private military company, one of the more infamous ones, Rubicon, destroys like something roughly speaking like 500 Ukrainian trucks every month. Trucks transporting troops, but a lot of times logistics. Yeah, they're going to need more cars. Yeah, they're going to need more vehicles. But being told you to do that, I remember being told, Dylan, you're going into Pokrovsk in the back of a pickup truck. And I'm like, I don't smoke, but can somebody hand me a cigarette? It's a gargantuan task to ask of a man. You need to have some will for it. And if somebody feels like they have a fighting chance, they'd be much more willing to go and defend their country. But a lot of people think they don't. And the scary thing is that if you volunteer, which 8 out of 10 people joining the Ukrainian armed forces now are not volunteering. I spoke to an infantryman, a unit commander from the 100th, fighting outside of Konstantinivka, and he's telling me that 8 out of 10 are conscripts, and a decent amount of them are constantly considering going AWOL because they just don't want to be here. They don't like the circumstances, but also, again, do they think that they have a fighting chance? Not even because it's impossible for Ukraine to win, but just the reputation that is carried. And by being conscripted, you have less choice in where you go in the armed forces. And so it becomes a prophecy where if you volunteer, you're more likely to be able to choose units where you can actually be used most effectively, where your commanders, value you, where there's like a good, culture around the unit. They treat you well. And you have a decent chance of not only going home, but also a decent chance of really bringing hell to the Russians. And so if you volunteer, if you willingly go to the war, much more likely to join up with one of those units. But if you get conscripted, you get mobilized, you get a lot less choice. If you're lucky, they'll say A or B out of the entirety of the armed forces. And a lot of times they'll just say, we need infantry, you go to infantry. And this might even look over certain skills you have. Oh, I know people who know how to fly drones and don't know how to drive who've been assigned driver positions. And those were and it was decisions like that that ultimately pushed them to go AWOL, to get out of there. And so it's not just a question of Western aid and the amount of Western aid that Ukraine needs in order to supplement people coming to the front and having people not want to go AWOL. Because I do think that would help. When I talk to people, them knowing that they have the West support, America's support, Germany support, France support, and being able to feel it on the ground, and it's not just words, that boosts morale. That really has an impact on people. It makes them feel that they have a fighting chance. It being stop and go might actually be worse than if America was to say screw you all together, because people feel like they're being toyed with and they are on this roller coaster instead of just accepting the situation as is. Even if a stop and go flow of weapons and stop and go sanctions is better than nothing at all, it might not be the case when it comes to morale. And of course, this is all compounded by Ukraine's domestic issues. And I will say Zelensky's recent attempts to roll back anti-corruption independence probably did not help. I didn't speak to many soldiers who were happy about it. So reform is necessary in the Ukrainian armed forces for them to lower these AWOLs. It's just 100% necessary. Western aid is also something that can help with more of these AWOL cases. Making clear to those who have gone AWOL that they can come back with no repercussions is also something that's going to be required. And a giant HR campaign, a giant PR campaign, not HR campaign, but probably that too, but a giant PR campaign in order to rebrand the Ukrainian armed forces as not the welcome to the Bakhmut brigade, welcome to Syrskyi's military, is rebranded a little bit towards looking at towards looking more like the innovative and scrappy armed force that will do what's necessary for its state's survival, and no more risk will be applied to their soldiers' lives than is absolutely necessary. And until they can do that, and until they can communicate that they have done that, then this problem is not going to go away. In fact, it might even get worse. And considering the manpower problems the Ukrainians already have, this is probably one of the biggest problems for the Ukrainian armed forces. Look, again, the numbers that I showed you should not be taken completely at face value. A really, really large percentage of those cases are people who went AWOL and then came back. And a certain other percentage of that is unauthorized unit transfers, i.e., I was fighting in the 68th, but then I got transferred to the 59th, but it hasn't officially gone through the channels, and I'm fighting in the 59th, but technically under the prosecutor's label, I'm AWOL, and there's so many cases that they haven't checked and like approved that I'm not AWOL, and so it's marked as AWOL, and therefore it comes up in the monthly numbers. But even if you account for all of that, even if the numbers is half of what is being reported, that is still a lot more soldiers that could be holding the front line right now when, you know, drones don't make the front line endlessly flexible. It must ultimately have a spine, and they need people to reinforce that spine if they have any hope of deterring further Russian offensives and stopping the Russian invasion from taking more of unoccupied Donetsk. I've been listening to Ukrainian soldiers on Ukrainian podcasts. It's way worse. They have commands to hold frontline at all costs all the time, irrespective of their position. If regiments sustain losses and can't fight, they tell to send cooks and writing guys. If you, as a commander, say that you can't, you get immediately replaced by a guy that does. Uh, doesn't know the fuck is happening and has one objective to send people to die. Otherwise, he gets replaced too and loses his career. What you've described is a worst case scenario, but is not something that is unheard of. I have heard of reports of skilled artillerymen being transferred to infantry because they need infantry. But also, there's a reputation in Ukrainian infantry that makes people not volunteer for the infantry. And so they need infantry to hold the front. You can't hold the front with infantry. And so if the Ukrainian armed forces is put in that position, they're going to find infantry somehow. But any position where UAV pilots are having to engage in firearm fights, like small arm fights, not because they've been transferred to infantry, but because the front line was thin enough that the Russians could penetrate past and infiltrators could stumble upon their positions, indicates that they need infantry from some source. Whether that means going into untapped upon parts of the Ukrainian demographics, or that means transfers, um, more mobilizations from already existing people, whether that means reforms and finding those who have gone AWOL and those who are hiding from recruitment. I mean, probably some amount of all of the above.